Hey, well, welcome back to the Walt Brown controversy. We are going to take a look at Walt's first letter to try to privately fix this situation. So I'll show you how to get these documents. You can read them for yourself. I'm going to add my screen to it. Let's see. Yeah, we'll put it this way. And now just go into, let's see, where are you going to go? We're going to go to rsr.org. And then we're going to search executive summary. And we're going to take this introduction, Kevin Lee's Austin Brown mediation executive summary. And you're going to get this. Let's see, we'll get rid of that. Okay, and so then this is, you can read this for yourself, but what I want to go down to is the first letter that Walt Brown writes to try to privately rectify this situation. And this is going to be June 18, 1993, letter from Brown to Austin. You can click on that and then you can read it yourself. Okay, this is from the Center for Scientific Creation. It is dated June 18th, 1993, and it is to Dr. Steve Austin. Dear Steve, for 3 years, I've become increasingly puzzled and disturbed by calls from many people who allege that you claim I have plagiarized your work. Is this true? According to them, you are saying that I stole your idea for Grand and Hopi Lakes, overflowed and carved idea. Wait a minute. According to them, you are saying that I stole your idea that Grand and Hopi Lakes overflowed and carved the Grand Canyon. I hope these individuals misunderstand your comments. In the 5th edition of In the Beginning, copyright August 1989, I devoted a section to a brief overview of the hydroplate theory. It contains specific information about Grand Lake, its boundaries, point of overflow, and a few of the evidences showing that it dumped quickly, forming the Grand Canyon. During the year before the book's publication, I presented this in lectures. People who attended, as well as audio tapes of those talks, will attest to that fact. All of this followed a year of intense study of the Grand Canyon and the regions of Grand Canyon and Grand and Hopi Lakes. The details of this work would fill a small book. Most of the discoveries I made that year have yet to be published, although 2 world-class geologists will attest to my exploration before 1989. Excuse me. I even took an experienced professor and field geologist through the lake region, including a flight over it. His concluding remark was that any geologist who had seen what I showed him would agree with my explanation for the Grand Canyon. Of course, it has been known for decades that canyons such as the channeled scablands of eastern Washington can quickly form by breaching a large lake's natural dam. Before August of 1989, I never heard or read anything by you concerning Grand and Hopi Lakes, their location, point of overflow, or supporting evidences for their catastrophic dumping. If I had known you had published those ideas, I would have cited them. I hope you would do the same for me. Correct academic procedures and honesty demand no less. During the summer of 1990, a person who took ICR's Grand Canyon rafting trip came to my office and showed me your guidebook, copyright 1990. It contained the Grand Lake explanation without any citation. You even used the name Grand Lake. If you publish this explanation for how the Grand Canyon formed before August 1989, I would appreciate a copy of it. As you know, sometimes people arrive at a similar conclusion almost immediately. This may have happened to us. Maybe you were considering the Grand Lake explanation when I published mine in August of 1989. Then you gained confidence that your ideas were correct and decided to publish your very similar conclusion. Perhaps as these last 4 years have passed, that explanation seems even more obvious and a part of you. Wait a minute. Perhaps as these last 4 years have passed, that explanation seems even more obvious and a part of you. And now you feel proprietary interest. When someone publishes a major conclusion similar to an unpublished conclusion of mine, I always try to contact the author, acknowledge their work and publication, and explain where their views coincide and where our views coincide and diverge. This opens a communication channel. They can see exactly where I am, and they can request that I acknowledge their prior publication or discovery. No such request has ever been made of me. For example, in 1978, Russ Humphreys published his biblical basis for the existence of water in the Earth's core. I phoned him and said that I had reached similar conclusions about subterranean water, although not in the core. When Michael Ord first published his ideas on the Ice Age in 1979, I phoned him and told him that in 1970, as the seeds of the hydroplate theory began falling into place, I reached a similar conclusion. Mike and I have since had several fruitful exchanges of ideas. However, Mike is not aware of the major phenomena that would have cooled the continents and warmed the oceans, causing and ending the Ice Age. That phenomena is only understood in light of the hydroplate theory and will be explained in some detail in the next edition of my book. In January 1976, I read an excellent impact article you wrote, number 32. I traveled that summer to ICR in part to meet you and discuss some similar ideas I had. I asked Henry Morris at lunch if Stuart E. Nevins, the fictitious name you were writing under, was available to talk. Morris only told me that you were away for the summer, not that you were writing under that name. I also discussed with Morris, Gish, and Schlusser some of my conclusions about the Ice Age, rapid continental movement, and mountain building during the flood. Morris suggested that I publish it as an ICR technical monogram. You and I may have had a convergence of ideas concerning Grand Lake. I certainly did not plagiarize your work or anyone else's. If you think I have, why did you not contact me first? Matthew 18, 15 to 17. Have you made such an accusation to others? I have never gotten upset when someone fails to reference my work, or even when they claim it is their own. This happens frequently, and I consider it a compliment. However, if someone does this and tells others that I stole it from him, I must act. Reputations and a person's effectiveness are easily damaged by such loose talk, especially when the allegations are made behind your back. Twice in the last 3 weeks, friends have said that you are making such accusations. It is very easy to convince them that such alleged charges are groundless, and a careful researcher can easily establish true authorship. For example, Emmett L. Williams et al., Erosion of the Grand Canyon of the Colorado River, Part 3, Creation Research Quarterly, Volume 29, June 1992, pages 19 to 21. I trust that in the future you will always reference any major idea and obtain permission to use figures you draw from others, including explanations whose publication preceded yours. Last night, for the first time, I read the section of your 1990 Grand Canyon guidebook where you laid out the Grand Lake explanation. I can see that your explanation differs slightly from mine because you do not understand the extremely high Kaibab upwarp and a few other matters. Basic mechanics and the hydroplate theory eliminate these problems. A phone call a few minutes ago by a friend of yours confirmed that you still have and are puzzled by these problems. So please don't say that you are proposing a different explanation because that difference is minor and wrong. Quickly acknowledging mistakes usually avoids a lot of trauma, especially in a research organization or an organization whose ethical reputation is important. If your explanation for the Grand Canyon was published independently of and before mine, I will quickly apologize to you and ask for your forgiveness and correct the matter. Otherwise, the ball is in your court. With a quick and sincere apology, you and ICR will find me easy to work with, and ICR can avoid much trauma. We should not work at cross purposes. Notice, Steve, I am first coming directly to you and Henry Morris with this, a courtesy you did not offer me. Isn't this the straightforward way to resolve matters that you were taught in the military? I hope to hear from you by July 19th so we can resolve this difficulty. Sincerely, Walt Brown. CC'd Henry Morris. So he sent that to Henry Morris and to, let's see, this was the letter to Brown. Okay. Brown to Austin, and then this is going to be the letter from Brown to Morris. We can take a peek at that. It should probably just be the same thing. Let's see here. This is Center for Creation Research. There's the address. Center for Creation, Scientific Creation, Walt Brown to Henry Morris. And this is dated June 18th, 1993. Dear Henry, this festering problem with Austin is just one more example of why I wrote you a single-page letter in March 13th, 1991. There are other examples of inaccurate and derogatory slams at me behind my back and plagiarism coming out of ICR. The endorsed portion of an ICR book, when compared with the enclosed works Stacy published 11 years earlier, is a clear case of plagiarism. After 13 years, you are still selling that ICR book. For over 10 years, I am still hearing second and third hand reports that ICR is spreading inaccurate, derogatory, but usually vague reports about me. Last week, I learned of a person in a foreign country who heard and believed one of these ICR stories. He is refusing to work with a prominent creationist in the United States, in part because that creationist is working with me. Both plagiarism and slander, false witness, are serious matters for ICR and would shock tens of thousands of people. These problems deserve your personal and forthright attention. I have written to you in some detail about similar problems before, but have seen no indication of concern or action. Please don't underestimate the seriousness of this and my resolve to correct these matters. I hope you can understand my deep concern and will assure me that this will not happen again. Henry, without your involvement, Austin and consequently ICR might be tempted to ignore rationalization or think that, pardon me. Just unplug it. Just unplug it. Oh, sorry about that. Let's start at the top. Henry, without your involvement, Austin and consequently ICR might be tempted to ignore, rationalize, or think he is above the problems I addressed in my letter to him. If Austin is spreading stories that I have plagiarized, then that alone would cause ICR people to spread derogatory comments about me. If so, you and I must do our best to rectify the matter. Otherwise, the creation movement will suffer. If these problems had occurred in my research organization, which was 10 times larger than ICR, I would have taken a personal and intense interest in solving them. If Austin has done what people have told me, if he was anywhere in my research laboratory, and if he wasn't extremely repentant, I would consider releasing him. Please let me know by July 19th how you intend to rectify matters. Sincerely, Walt. Okay. All right. Okay. What's on here? The author. Okay. All righty. So let's go back up and let's see what their response is. That was a letter from Austin, a letter to Brown. Let's see the letter from Austin. This is June 21st. From the Institute of Creation Research, June 21st, 1993. Letter from Steve Austin to Dr. Walt Brown. Dear Walt, this letter is a follow-up to our phone call of June 21st. You say in your letter of June 18th that you began to lecture on the breach dam explanation for Grand Canyon the year before the 5th edition of your book. In the beginning, copyright August 1989, was published. This is an interesting statement, as the following observations indicate. Enclosed is the April 1989 version of the ICR Grand Canyon Field Study Tour Guidebook, copyright 1988, the text of which is a reprint of the 1988 Grand Canyon Field Study Tour Guidebook. That text was written in November of 1987, and the book printed in February of 1988. It contains clear language describing the theory of a breach dam. These publications would appear to prove that I am the first creationist to propose the breach dam theory for the origin of the Grand Canyon. When did I first begin to lecture on the breach dam theory for Grand Canyon? I believe it was in 1983, after I saw the startling resemblance between the breach dam of the North Fork of the Turtle River and Grand Canyon. please see my publication, Rapid Erosion at Mount St. Helens in 1984, issue of Origins. Here, there is a description of the Little Grand Canyon at Mount St. Helens. A copy of the paper is enclosed. Okay, so here's the paper. Wait. Oh, here's something else. Oh, there's that. And I guess it continues. Who was the first creationist proposed that a large post-flood lake existed in southeastern Utah? I was working with Dr. Ed Holroyd, Arvada, Colorado, to do the terrain analysis, which led to the plotting of the lake shown in illustration on page 54 of the 1989 Grand Canyon Guidebook, published in February of 1989. As best as I can remember, this plotting was done in 1987, but I would need to check my archives of correspondence. I am uncertain when the first-hand sketch was made of the figure, which was later redrawn to appear on page 54. There had to be a significant period of time between the hand drawing and the finished figure. Our artist at ICR is very slow at finalizing my sketches. It would appear that I preceded you by 2 years on recognition of the lake in southeastern Utah. The only problem was that I did not give the lake a name. When you printed the 5th edition of In the Beginning, I saw the name Grand Lake. Thus, you got priority on the name. Later editions of the ICR Grand Canyon Guidebook have a favorite footnote acknowledging that you provided the name. I can understand why some people say that you plagiarized my work. We came to the same conclusion, but my conclusion preceded yours by 2 years. I believe that we came up with the theory independently. I am not saying that there is any plagiarism here. It is the appearance that leads people to say this. In your June 18 letter, you write, if your explanation for the Grand Canyon was published independent of and before mine, I will quickly apologize and ask forgiveness and correct the matter. Could you provide the acknowledgement and apology in writing? Henry Morris and Emmett Williams will want to know. People in future years will probably want to know. Let's set the record straight. Sincerely in Christ, Stephen A. Austin, Chairman, Geology Department. CC Henry Morris. And 2 enclosures. All right. So what's the next one? All right. Where's the next letter? All right. Okay, a letter from Morris to Brown, June 22nd. Okay, this is from the Institute of Creation Research. It's from Henry Morris, I believe. Let's get this straight. Yeah, from Henry Morris, and this is what he says. Dear Walt, your letter of June 18th has taken me quite by surprise. When you expressed concern several years ago about certain references to you by ICR speakers, I asked Gish, Ham, and others about this. They all assured me that they never even mention you or any of your particular theories in their talks, let alone slander you or plagiarize. I informed you of this and thought that was sufficient. Now you are still charging ICR with slander and even threatening some kind of action. Obviously, I cannot take any action on vague reports when you give no specifics. And when those you are accusing assure me there is no basis of your charges, can you provide name, dates, and any kind of specific data? If so, I will try to check on it. With reference to the Slusher book, this is the very first time I have heard of any plagiarism in the book. The example you cited seems superficially, at least, to be a fairly standard mathematical derivation. I doubt whether Professor Stacy would call it plagiarism. In any case, this is the first time anyone has mentioned it. As you know, Harold Slusher left ICR about 8 years ago, and we have had very little contact with him since. The only reason we still list a few of his monograms is because the original printings have not been exhausted. We have never planned to reprint any of them. In view of your complaint, we will possibly delete this particular book from our next catalog, although much of the information in it is still worthwhile. If you want to pursue this further, you should contact him directly. So far as I know, he is still at UTEP in El Paso in the physics department. And as far as Steve Austin is concerned, he has already answered your letter. I hope his response will be satisfactory. Thanks for writing. I trust your work is going well. Sincerely yours in Christ, Henry M. Morris, President. Okay, so those are two responses. Okay. Okay, and this is going to be July 6th of 1993. This is a letter from Brown to Morris and Austin. Okay. Grand Lake Breach Dam Theories Setting the Record Straight by Walter T. Brown. Originally written July 6, 1993. Last amended November 9th, 1993. The problem. Over the last 3 years, I've become increasingly puzzled and disturbed by several calls from people who have heard others imply that I plagiarized some work from Dr. Steve Austin and of the Institute of Creation Research. They claim that I took, or at best did not acknowledge, Austin's ideas that Grand and Hopi Lakes overflowed and carved the Grand Canyon. The reports are usually vague. Therefore, I have generally ignored the problem. However, I wrote Dr. Henry Morris on March 13th and asked him, among other things, to look into this unsupported allegation coming out of ICR. One such incident recently verified was witnessed by Dr. and Mrs. Douglas Block of Rockford, Illinois. They attended Austin's Sunday evening talk at the People's Church in Belmont, Wisconsin on November 3rd, 1990. After the program, the Blocks had a very congenial conversation with Austin. Austin asked Dr. Block, a geologist, what his plans were after retirement. Dr. Block said he wanted to do some work with Walt Brown. Both Dr. and Mrs. Block remember that Austin suddenly looked angry and said that Brown had taken some of his material on the Grand Canyon. Austin then gave the Blocks a cold shoulder and walked away. The Blocks left the church stunned, upset, and aghast. The most recent allegation relayed to me was by Dr. Bob Gentry on June 10th, 1993. Gentry, who was reluctant to mention his source, said that Dr. Russell Humphreys told him that I should acknowledge Austin's prior work. While Humphreys never used the word plagiarism, Gentry assured me, and later told Humphreys that plagiarism was clearly implied. Partly for this reason, Humphreys declined to work with Gentry on a film project. Humphreys confirmed this to me by phone on June 28th and 30th, although he admitted he did not know of my work on the Grand Canyon. Humphreys worked closely for Austin as a guide in the Grand Canyon tours. Humphreys worked closely for Austin as a guide on 9 Grand Canyon tours. Although Gentry told Humphreys he did not accept his allegations, it presented Gentry with a liability. If Humphreys were correct, it could discredit Gentry and his project involving great effort and expense. I have known since August 1990 that Austin was proposing explanations that were remarkably similar to mine. Even the name I selected a year earlier, Grand Lake, was the same. Raising the issue of priority seemed a petty and egotistical, so I tried to ignore the matter. The important thing was getting the information out. We are working for the same Lord and Creator. I have never gotten upset when someone fails to reference my work or even when they claim it as their own and copyright it. When this happens, I consider it a compliment. However, if someone does this and he or others working with him announce that I stole it, then I must act. This means hitting the priority issue head on. Reputations and a person's effectiveness are easily damaged by such loose talk, especially when the allegations are made behind your back. Such behavior hurts the creation movement. People who are committed to biblical inerrancy and careful science occasionally have honest disagreements. Most disagreements are due to our differing backgrounds, specializations, callings, and circumstances. With good communications among ourselves, these differences should strengthen the creation movement. However, poor communication can cause harmful disagreements. Backbiting is the worst form of communication. If you have an objection, you should first go to the alleged offender in private, Matthew 18. If he does not acknowledge his errors, then, or after hearing one or two additional witnesses, other Christians should be told. Notice in these verses, that is the unpleasant procedure, not a suggestion. Setting the record straight. On June 18th, 1993, I wrote Austin and asked if these allegations were true. Austin telephoned me and said that he had not told anyone that I stole any of his ideas. He thought people who heard his ideas before mine might have assumed that I took them from him. Austin then wrote me on June 21st and explained more specifically. I can understand why some people say that you plagiarized my work. We came to the same conclusion, but my conclusion preceded yours by 2 years. I believe that we came up with the theory independently. I'm not saying that there is any plagiarism here. It is the appearance that leads people to say that. Since Austin feels he has precedence by 2 years, a claim that I believe is incorrect, he may have left the impression, knowingly or unknowingly, with others that I plagiarized. Austin ended his letter by asking me to set the record straight. This, then, is the purpose of this report. Michael J. Ort has just published a critique of what he calls the breach dam explanation of the formation of the Grand Canyon. Although Ort had read Dr. Emmett Williams et al.'s article summarizing my 1989 explanation of Grand Canyon, Ort had not read my explanation. Ort aimed his critique at Austin's 1991 explanation in the Institute for Creation Research Grand Canyon Field Study Tour Guidebook. Ort raised 5 geological problems and suggested how the lakes whose waters supposedly carved the Grand Canyon were filled. As I explained by phone to Ort on June 26th and to Williams, who reviewed Ort's paper on June 25th, those 5 problems are easily explained, and the basins were automatically filled at the end of the flood. I hope Ort's article will not diminish interest in the breach dam idea or confuse the priority issue even more. I cannot correct the record by a simple letter to the editor of the Creation Research Society Quarterly, or even by publishing a counter article. The brief justification for the hydroplate theory, which sets the stage for the Grand Canyon's formation many years after the flood, required 25 pages. A complete explanation for the information of the Grand Canyon, a complete explanation for the formation of the Grand Canyon, which I someday hope to write, would be of comparable length. I felt fortunate in 1989 to summarize the Grand Lake explanation, TLE, in about 1 page after explaining the hydroplate theory. The other details and supporting discoveries, when explained, will make GLE even more obvious. After talking and corresponding with Austin and reading his 1988-1999 guidebooks, I can now present the chronology of various ideas. If Austin, Henry Morris, or others can show errors or omissions in what I have written, I will happily correct the record and attach their comments. The objective of this paper is to accurately determine who disseminated what and when. The intended reader is anyone who might have heard any misinformation or who wonders when the dam breaching ideas were proposed and by whom. A summary. After carefully studying these matters, I concluded Austin may not have said I stole or plagiarized his ideas concerning the formation of the Grand Canyon. However, others clearly remember him saying that I had taken his ideas. The proposal that the lake's natural dam was breached and its waters carved canyons along the Colorado River dates back to Newberry in 1861. Austin read a similar proposal by Blackwelder, published in 1934. Neither Newberry nor Blackwelder specified any lake location, how such a large lake could have formed, and when or how they were breached. In 1984, Austin published a paper describing how a 100-foot deep canyon formed when Spirit Lake suddenly spilled out near Mount St. Helens. Austin described this erosion channel as a Little Grand Canyon. Number 4, Dr. Edmund W. Holroyd III, in December of 1986, realized that the sudden release of the waters of a giant lake may have carved Grand Canyon. On February 26, 1987, Holroyd sent Austin a detailed color photograph of where such a lake would have been. The lake was drawn by a computer tracing the 1,700 meters contour line. 1,700-meter contour line. That'd be 5,577 foot contour line. I think that's above sea level. Okay, number 5. In 1988 and 1989 ICR guidebooks, Austin wrote that he was entertaining the possibility that Grand Canyon formed by the breaching action of a lake east of the canyon. Independently, number 6, in the spring of 1988, number 6. Independently of Holroyd in the spring of 1988, I determined that a large lake, which I named Grand Lake, with a surface elevation of 5,700 feet, once existed in southeast Utah, parts of Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado. See figure on page 10. This was confirmed by identifying about 5 or 6 geological features near or just below the elevation. I concluded, let's take a look at that on page 10, see if it's here. All right, we're going to be able to see it. All righty. I don't see it. Okay, sorry about that. Oh, I didn't get all the way down to 10. All right, sorry about the delay. There it is. There's the Grand Lake. That's what he's referring to. Okay, so Grand Lake is huge. That's twice the size of Lake Michigan, and that's in Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and a little bit of Arizona. And there's Hopi Lake there, Hopi Lake in Arizona. And a little tidbits of that in Grand Lake, that'd be 350 feet deep in Farmington, New Mexico. It'd be 1,100 feet in Grand Junction, Colorado. And it would be 1,400 feet deep in Page, Arizona. And the Hopi Lake would be about 1,000 feet deep in those cities. All right, so that's what he's referring to. That's the big lake up on a big plateau. Let's see if I can find my spot. I think we're down to number 6 or something. All right, he was doing the timeline. Okay, we're at number 6, I think. Okay, this was confirmed by identifying, we're going halfway through number 6, confirmed by identifying 5 or 6 geological features near or just below that elevation. I concluded that this lake, another extinct lake east of the Grand Canyon, which earlier geologists had named Hopi Lake. The other lakes higher up in the Colorado River drainage system helped carve the Grand Canyon. On September 16th, 1988, in St. Paul, Minnesota, I began speaking and broadcasting nationally on the Grand Lake, or GLE. What was that again? GLE, Grand Lake something. Let's do the old Command F thing, GLE. Okay, Grand Lake Explanation. That's what it is, Grand Lake Explanation. All right, on the GLE. Okay, there we go, Grand Lake Explanation. Okay, in February 1989, Austin inserted a page into ICR's 1988 guidebook showing Holroyd's Lake, which Austin knew was defined by the 5,577-foot contour line. Under that figure, Austin wrote that it was blocked at the 5,700-foot elevation and it breached its dam to form Grand Canyon. ICR republished the guidebook in February of 1989 with a 1988 copyright. Holroyd gave Austin permission to publish Holroyd's map in the 1989 guidebook and suggested how proper acknowledgement could be made. Austin did not mention Holroyd, however. Holroyd does not fault Austin for that. I published a summary of Grand Lake Explanation in August of 1989 in the 5th edition of In the Beginning. Austin purchased that book weeks later in St. Paul, Minnesota. Major changes were made to ICR's 1990 guidebook. There was no more tentativeness. It became very specific in saying that the Grand Canyon formed by dam breaching. Grand Lake was shown and named for the first time in ICR's guidebook without reference. Austin believes Hopi Lake was to the east of Grand Canyon Austin believes Hopi Lake. Okay. Without reference. Number 10, Austin believes Hopi Lake to the east of the Grand Canyon initiated the events that carved the Grand Canyon. I believe a series of lake dumpings cascaded like falling dominoes, ending with the dumping of Grand Lake and finally Hopi Lake. Those dumpings would have eroded enough masses off northern Arizona to cause an instability in the Earth's crust, which produced the Kaibab upwarp. I will not explain here the theoretical or experimental justification for this buckling instability. Today, that upwarp is over 1,400 feet higher than either Grand or Hopi Lake ever was. Had the Kaibab upwarp existed before the lakes dumped, it would have diverted their waters away from the Grand Canyon. Early proponents of breaching events. The earliest hint of this breaching idea along the Colorado River was by John Strong Newberry in 1861. Newberry was the geologist on the Ives expedition of 1857 to 1858, sponsored by the U.S. War Department to study the lower Grand Canyon, Colorado River. Newberry believed that the mountain range had impounded the river in a series of basins, which, on overflowing, had led to the outfitting of the canyons, through which its turbid waters now flow with rapid and almost unobstructed current from the source to the mouth. In May of 1988, I located Newberry's report of that expedition at the Grand Canyon Library, but unfortunately could not find anything in it to substantiate Newberry's statement that Williams et al. Apparently located Newberry's explanation. Therefore, Newberry was probably the first to propose that at least some canyons along the Colorado River formed by breaching of natural dams. Professor Harlan Brents popularized the fact that breached dams can quickly and catastrophically form canyons. In 1923, Brents proposed that the channeled scablands of eastern Washington state formed when a large lake spilled over a glacial dam. The dam quickly eroded, spilled out a volume of water equal to about half that now in Lake Michigan. For about 40 years, opposition raged against Brents for his catastrophic and heretical views. Geologists dramatically accepted Brets's explanation in 1962, establishing ever since the dam breaching mechanism in the minds of geology students and some of the general public. Many people have observed, and I have personally seen, that the channeled scablands bear some resemblance to a miniature Grand Canyon. Austin first learned of a dam breaching proposal along the Colorado River from a 1934 paper by Elliott Blackwelder. Welder placed these events in the Pleistocene period, but did not specify the location of the lakes or many other related details. Okay, my first contacts with Austin. In January of 1976, I read an excellent impact article by Stuart E. Nevins of ICR. I traveled that summer to ICR in part to meet Nevins and discuss some similar ideas I had. I asked Henry Morris at lunch if I could see Nevins, the fictitious name Austin was writing under. Morris only told me that Nevins was away for the summer, not that Austin was writing under that name. Later, I was quite surprised to learn that Nevins was really Steve Austin. It is unusual for a scientist or even a graduate student working under evolutionist professors to write under a pseudonym. It is unusual for a scientist or even a graduate student working under evolutionist professors to write under a pseudonym. In February of 1981, I flew from Chicago to ICR to discuss several organizational matters of mutual interest and to meet some of their people. Austin entered the room where several of us were talking. Paul McKinney had accompanied me from Chicago and who knew Austin asked me to explain to Austin what has become known as the hydroplate theory. Austin said that he had only had 5 minutes before a driver would arrive to pick him up, but he would listen. I declined, saying that an explanation would take too long. Austin insisted I give the explanation because he could understand it in 5 minutes. He said that he had heard everything that had been proposed about the flood, and he would quickly understand what I was saying. Again, I declined. Everyone in the room urged me to begin, so I did. Before I finished the first of about 50 points, Austin interrupted and began giving his experiences supporting what I had just said. After he talked for several minutes, he stopped and put on his coat and abruptly left to catch his ride. The first creation seminar I ever gave was in March of 1981. Mr. Terry Mondi, who attended, called a week or so later. He was very enthusiastic about the hydroplate theory and urged me to publish it. He said that he had called Austin at ICR and urged him to look into it. Austin's response was, "I wish these non-geologists would stay out of our business." Mondi recently confirmed these details. Hopefully, Austin has outgrown these attitudes that convey arrogance. Nevertheless, it was obvious that he had no interest in exchanging ideas with me. My next dealing with Austin was the letter I sent him on June 18th, 1993. Okay, 1986 to 1987. In August of 1986, Dr. Edwin W. Holroyd met Austin at the International Conference on Creationism in Pittsburgh. He told Austin his interest in explaining the absence of rock fragments, talus, at the base of many cliffs on the Colorado Plateau. If the cliffs eroded over millions of years, the base of the cliffs should be thickly littered with boulders and other crumbling remains. Piles of crumbling boulders should extend thousands of feet from the base of each cliff. Holroyd wrote a short article about this a year later. He suggested that a vast lake possibly existed east and north of the Grand Lake. He wrote, "Another possibility for talus removal is the shoreline destruction of rocks by wave action. One could also imagine a series of lakes if the Colorado River was plugged by high ground between about 5,600 feet level would be supported by the present regional topography without the water spilling out over another divide to the north. The resulting series of lakes along Colorado, Little Colorado, Green, and San Jose rivers would resemble several of the Great Lakes in sizes. Some believe that the sudden release of such a great quantity of water through fault-generated crack between the north and south rims of the Grand Canyon near the Visitor Center is responsible for the bulk of the carving of Grand Canyon." In February 1987, Holroyd sent Austin a color photograph of a computer-generated map showing where a lake would be whose surface was 5,577 feet above sea level. It may be the first attempt to identify where a lake or lakes were that carved the Grand Canyon. Austin kept that important photograph in his office for the next 2 months. In 1990, Holroyd presented a more detailed paper on this topic of missing talus at the International Creation Conference in Pittsburgh. In that paper, he concluded a copy of his map. On June 25th, 1993, I telephoned Holroyd, learned of his original work for the first time, and the details I have just described. One of the reviewers of Holmgren's 1990 paper was Dr. Bernard Northrup. He wrote, "I originally had proposed that the Kaibab-Coconino uplift, where Austin calls the Kaibab upwarp, itself had been the temporary dam. However, presently, I think that Walter Brown is correct in proposing that the Vermilion Cliff, Echo Cliff uplift, was the barrier behind which the ice waters impounded." 1988 to August of 1988, Brown's work. In January of 1988, I began a year of study on the Grand Canyon. It included completing a geology course on the Grand Canyon at Arizona State University, reading dozens of books and documents on the Grand Canyon, conducting many field trips into the canyon and especially into the surrounding region, southeast Utah, western Colorado, and northeast Arizona, and taking a raft trip down the Colorado River led by a prominent geologist and author on the Grand Canyon. By March of 1988, after considering and later rejecting 5 different explanations for the Grand Canyon, I began to formulate a new and specific explanation for its formation, which I will call Grand Lake Explanation, GLE. To me, the most important test of a theory or explanation is its ability to make successful predictions. Several surprising predictions could obviously be made with the Grand Lake Explanation. So from March to June of 1988, I searched for several of these unusual phenomena. Most were found. One that eluded me for several months was a vertical, slightly reversed fault line that had to be, 1, cut across the marble platform at a certain location, 2, trend in the proper direction, and 3, be visible in several very inaccessible parts of Marble Canyon. The Arizona State geologist told me that no fault of any kind was recorded near there. It was clear to me that if this fault did not exist, the GLE was probably wrong. Detailed aerial photos were not much help. Before beginning the difficult task of hunting further, I asked Dr. Block, who had been a geology professor for 30 years, to fly to Phoenix so I could see if he concurred with my prediction. He did, and he concurred. Weeks later, after several false starts, I found the fault. Friends who know the fidicious details, which I am sparing you, call it Walt's fault. I will never forget the find because it almost cost me my life. Dehydration, trapped inside a box canyon high on the south wall of Ryder Canyon. I went into the backcountry with permission and with more than the recommended water, but foolishly unaccompanied, just a week before my daughter's wedding. After finding the fault, I became and still am fairly confident that I know at least the general outlines of how the Grand Canyon and many other canyons formed. The keys to this understanding lie primarily outside the Grand Canyon, not inside. I began preparing photos and explanation for a series of seminars and radio programs I would give that fall. In April 1988, I read the 1988 guidebook prepared primarily by Austin. He was supposing, page 41, that the Grand Canyon formed by the breaching of an ancient lake east of the canyon. He said, "Lately, I've been supposing that the plateau land in northern Arizona was uplifted rapidly and that the drainage basin upstream was blocked by that plateau. That elevated plateau would have formed a gigantic natural dam with a lake east of the present Grand Canyon. Thin sedimentary deposits from the lake occur east of the canyon. Modern experience with man-made dams shows that when they fail catastrophically. I suppose that the northern Arizona dam also failed rapidly, allowing the impounded lake to drain westward over the plateau, causing significant erosion to the Grand Canyon. A catastrophic drainage model for the origin of Grand Canyon needs to be supported by geologic evidence. Austin then listed many features in the canyon which shows that rapid erosion occurred. Most are discussed in the abundant writings on the Grand Canyon. Some were explained to me by Dr. Art Chadwick, who visited my office in the spring of 1988. Art spent over 700 days in the canyon over a 13-year period. Austin said nothing about why that 30-mile thick dam failed, what specifically lifted the Kaipab Plateau, or why it rose so rapidly. The force and energy requirements would have been awesome. Austin knew from the writings of Howell Williams, who named the region Hopi Lake, that the valley of the Little Colorado River contained lake bottom sediments. Dr. Block and I verified in June of 1988 that these sediments existed in the Hopi Lake region up to almost the 6,000-foot elevation. We also made a similar verification in the basin that held Grand Lake. Most of my speaking engagements are scheduled in the fall. About 15 were in the fall of 1988. The first, a radio broadcast on KTIS radio in St. Paul, Minnesota on September 16th, 1988, stands out in my mind. It was rebroadcasted over dozens of affiliated stations in the United States. The tape of that broadcast was advertised and sold by the station, and I have mailed out over 200 copies. A copy is enclosed as attachment 1. Just a few minutes into the program, I described my thinking on Grand Canyon and my work during the previous 6 months. I received many phone calls afterwards asking for more details, which I always provided. In the program, I discussed much of what I had published in August of 1989. That fall, I frequently spoke of the 5,700-foot Grand Lake. On September 18th, 1988, at Northwestern College in St. Paul, I gave a 2-hour presentation on the Grand Canyon formation. August 1988, August 1989, ICAR's 1989 guidebook. In February of 1989, Austin published the 1989 guidebook. I first saw it on June 23rd, 1993, when Austin sent it to me. The only paragraphs in it, page 51, concerning a rapid means for the forming of the Grand Canyon are reproduced below. Erosion, okay, this is quoting from the book. Erosion of the Grand Canyon, a geologist's personal reflections. Okay, the catastrophic drainage theory. My mind began to consider the geologic evidence at Grand Canyon. As explained before, it seems certain that the Kaibab Upward was established before the Colorado River was positioned across northern Arizona. Could the uplift of the plateau have created a drainage basin east of the Grand Canyon, which completely filled with floodwater? Could the large dam created by the Kaibab Upward have been breached, allowing the lake behind it to drain over the plateau through northern Arizona, initiating the erosion of Grand Canyon? There is evidence that an impounded mass of water existed on the east side of the Kaibab Upward. Geologists call the sedimentary deposits restricted to the east of Grand Canyon the Baridachi Formation. They contain regular layers of silt and sand, which look like lake deposits, which would have been deposited from accelerated erosion in the drainage basin now occupied by the upper Colorado River. These are thin strata that represent a short time geology. Okay. Classed as Pliocene by many geologists. Unquote. So now we're back to Walt's description. The most significant item in Austin's book, again, which I first saw on June 23rd, 1993, was a full-page map on page 54. I now know it is Holroyd's map, attachment 2, although there is no reference to Holroyd in the 1989 guidebook. In the 1990 guidebook, Holroyd was referenced only by plotted by Edmund W. Holroyd III. This minimized Holroyd's real contribution. Holroyd's map was similar to the one I published 6 months later for the formation of Grand Canyon. Under Holroyd's map in the 1989 guidebook, Austin placed the following statement. A computer was asked to draw the shoreline of the lake, which would form behind the Kaibab Upward if the Grand Canyon were blocked at the 57-foot, 100-foot elevation. The lake would form as shown above. It would contain the water of three Great Lakes. This computer-generated lake approximates the outline of the ancient lake, which breached its dam to form the Grand Canyon. Unquote. This is Walt Brown writing again. This then is Austin's writing on how the Grand Canyon formed 5 months after I began speaking nationally on the Grand Lake explanation, but 6 months before my publication in August of 1989. Consider several points. Where did Austin get the 57-foot 100 elevation number? Since the spring of 1988, I have always used the number for the height of Grand Lake. The rationale for that number is complex since it is not one that someone else would likely conclude. It seems probable that Austin got that number from me. This means that he probably heard my explanation sometime after I began talking publicly about it, September 16th, 1988, but before his letter to Holroyd on January 23rd, 1989, and note 15. What was so special about 5,700 feet? The most obvious way to approximate Grand Lake's elevation is the way Holroyd did and the way Austin told me on the phone it was derived. See how high water would rise today if a very tall dam were built along the Colorado River between Vermilion Cliffs and Efko Cliffs. The answer is very close to Holroyd's number of 5,577 feet. However, I found many geological features within a 150-mile radius of the Grand Canyon that I felt strongly showed that the lake was once there and it dumped rapidly. The elevations of those features were closer to 5,700 feet. Therefore, weighing all the evidence and realizing that the topography and elevation of the land differs slightly from what it would have been before Grand Lake dumped, I arrived at 5,700 feet. My approach could be wrong, and Holroyd's right. The point is that I arrived at a unique number. I carefully derived this number because several hundred hours of field and artwork would later depend on it. Map publishers usually place intentional errors on their maps. Therefore, if anyone copies the map, they will copy the error. Courts have used this to show copyright infringement. The elevation I have always used for Grand Lake, 5,700 feet, was such a trademark, and Austin used it. The second point is that Austin stated in our phone call and in his June 21st letter that his map was copyrighted in 1986 and written in 1987 and 1 and 2 years before mine. He wrote, quote, enclosed is the April 1989 version of the ICR Grand Canyon Field Study Tour Guide, copyright 1988, the text of which is a reprint of the April 1988 Grand Canyon Field Study Tour Guide. That text was written in November of 1987 and the book printed in February of 1988. It contains clear language describing the theory of a breached dam. Those publications would appear to prove that I am the first creationist to propose the breached dam theory for the origin of Grand Canyon, unquote. This is misleading, except for the text under Holroyd's map. Austin's comments on breaching were simply musings. My mind began to ponder, ... Could the uplift of the plateau have created, ... Could the large dam created by the Kaibab upward have been breached, ... etc. Yes, part of one sentence under the map, which Austin added in February of 1989, was specific. The ancient lake which breached its dam to form the Grand Canyon. However, that is an assertion, not clear language describing a theory of a breached dam. Proposing a theory involves explaining many cause and effect details and answering many related questions. 3. Newberry and Blackwelder were the first suggested that a breached dams carved canyons on the Colorado River. Proving that you are the first creationist proposed the breached dam theory for the origin of Grand Canyon, as Austin claims, is irrelevant. Discoveries are only made once. For example, it is important to know that the first creationist to conclude that E equals MC. For example, is it important to know the first creationist to conclude that E equals MC squared? Having a 1988 copyright on a book that was slightly modified and published in 1989 reminds one of backdating a letter or a check. The modifications were significant. Let's read that again. Having a 1988 copyright on a book that was slightly modified and published in 1989 reminds one of backdating a letter or a check. The modifications were significant. Chapters 7 and 8 were obviously modified because they listed the April 1989 itinerary and participants in the 1989 tour. One other change was interesting. Holroyd's full-page map, placing the note below it, and then eliminating enough references at the end of that section so the page numbers for the rest of the book would not have to be changed. What overriding incentive caused Austin to go to the considerable trouble to make just this isolated change? On June 21st, 1993, Austin emphasized that the 1988 copyright on our phone conversation, and in the paragraph of this letter shown above. Did he put a 1988 copyright on the 1989 guidebook and published in 1989 because he wanted to establish a 1988 priority? Number 5. Austin's June 21st letter to me continued, who was the first creationist to propose that a large post-flood lake existed in southeast Utah? I was working with Dr. Ed Holroyd to do the terrain analysis, which led to the plotting of the lake shown in illustration on page 54 of the 1989 Grand Canyon Guidebook, published in February of 1989. As best as I can remember, this plotting was done in 1987, but I would need to check my archives of correspondence. I am uncertain when the first hand sketched was made on the figure, which was later redrawn to appear on page 54. There had to be a significant period of time between the handwriting and the finished figure. Our artist at ICR is very slow at finalizing my sketches. It would appear that I preceded you by 2 years on recognition of the lake in southeast Utah. Okay. Austin's emphasis. Unquote. Okay, this is Walt responding. No, Holroyd preceded both Austin and me by about 2 years in proposing where the large lake that carved Grand Canyon might have been. Again, Austin is taking credit for Holroyd's original work, saying that he was working with Ed Holroyd to do the terrain analysis is an understatement that hides Holroyd's true contribution. Holroyd drew the first map of a single 5,577-foot lake and proposed that it might have carved the Grand Canyon. Holroyd's reached the conclusion in December of 1986. Has a slide of it that is stamped January 1987 and mailed it to Austin in February of 1987. Only by taking credit for Holroyd's work can Austin make the statement that he places in bold above. Note, Holroyd does not object to Austin's use without credit of Holroyd's map. Besides proceeding where a lake was that dumped and formed the Grand Canyon is just the first step. To be credible, you must answer many other questions. Where and how was the first natural dam breached? Circumstantial evidence is fine, but can you show that the vast lake would have been there and was there, that a dam would be breached, and that it would have catastrophically dumped, and that the volume of water was sufficient to carry a huge volume of Mesozoic and Paleozoic sediment off northern Arizona? Number 6, Austin's 1989 statement under the map contains several minor errors which he corrected in the 1990 guidebook. First, he said that his figure describes one lake. Instead, it represents 3 of the many lakes that were once impounded by Colorado Plateau. It showed 2 of them, Grand Lake and Hopi Lake, in my figure. They are separated by the 7,000-foot Kaibab Plateau near where Austin placed the label Black Mesa. Another minor point is that the impounded Hopi Lake could rise above 5,950 feet above today's sea level, not the 5,577 feet shown on the map. Number 7, Austin does not say why it seems certain that the Kaibab Upward was established before the Colorado River was positioned across northern Arizona, nor does he explain how the drainage basin east of the Grand Canyon, which ICR's 1990 guidebook clarified to mean Hopi Lake, could ever breach the Kaibab Upwarp. That upwarp is about 7,400 feet high. Water will not spontaneously flow uphill 1,400 vertical feet. Austin was puzzled by it then, and he still is today. His best guess is that it was breached by piping underground seepage. It should be clear that the negligible amount of water would sweep through the 30-mile wide Kaibab Upwarp, especially when rock cemented by limestone has such slight porosity. Slow seepage moves very little material. Austin understands my objection. Finally, by surface flow, overtopping is much more likely if the dry part of the natural dam is vertical and tall, as are man-made dams, and as was the case with the 1/2 mile high Vermilion Echo cliffs. Overtopping most water divides, topographic saddles, will not produce catastrophic dumping. There's just too much frictional resistance to the initial outfitting action on too gradual a slope. The lake's level drops too fast for a given amount of vertical rim erosion. August 1989. On August of 1989, I published the Grand Lake Explanation, GLE. Since it was brief, I will repeat it below. The relevant statements occur 3 places in a 26-page section entitled The Fountains of the Great Deep, page 56 or 58. Have you ever wondered how the Grand Canyon formed? After examining much broader issues in the following pages, a surprisingly simple explanation will be given. The explanation of the hydroplate theory that followed page 58 is very helpful in understanding how the Grand Canyon formed. page 75 and 76. The drainage of the waters that covered the earth left very little. The drainage of the waters that covered the earth left every continent basin filled to the brim with water. Some of those post-flood lakes lost more water by evaporation and seepage than they gained by rainfall and drainage. Consequently, they shrank over the centuries. A well-known example was former Lake Bonneville, which has shrunk to become the Great Salt Lake. Through rainfall and drainage from higher terrain, other lakes gained more water than they lost and thus overflowed their rims at the lowest point. Just the slightest erosion of a rim allowed more water to flow over it. This eroded it even deeper and caused even more water to cut it faster. Thus, the downcutting process accelerated catastrophically. Eventually, the entire lake dumped through a deep slit, which we today call a canyon. These waters emptied into the next lower basin, causing them to overflow their rim and create another canyon. It was like falling dominoes. The most famous canyon of all, the Grand Canyon, was caused primarily by the dumping of what we call Grand Lake, which occupied the southeast quarter of Utah, parts of northeast Arizona, as well as small parts of Colorado and New Mexico. It stood at an elevation of 5,700 feet above present sea level. Grand Lake spilled over and quickly eroded its natural dam 22 miles southwest of what is now Page, Arizona. In doing so, the western boundary of former Hopi Lake, elevation 5,950 feet, was eroded, releasing the waters that occupied the present valley of the Little Colorado River. In just a few days, more water was released over the northern Arizona than is in all of the Great Lakes combined. Wow. Okay, this is a copy of his book, Marble Canyon. You can read that. Okay, anything noteworthy? Marble Canyon, eroded by the waters of Grand Lake. Yeah, that's interesting. While the Grand Canyon was eroded by its waters in both Grand and Hopi Lake, the boundaries of both Hopi Lake and Grand Lake have been recently identified by a number of their geological and topographical features. Hopi Lake has been reported on previously. The catastrophic dumping of Grand Lake took place through what is now the gap between Echo Cliffs and Vermilion Cliffs. Before the rapid erosion of the natural dam, those two cliffs were a single face in the block faulted mountain. The releases of these vast waters first eroded hundreds of meters of relatively soft Mesozoic sediment off of northern Arizona. Once completed, the down cutting through the relatively hard Kaibab limestone began. As it proceeded, more water with increasing hydrodynamic head was released from the water-saturated sediments flanking the canyon. Subsurface flow mass wasting and slumping were extreme. The weight of material removed from northern Arizona produced isostatic uplifts that account for the barbed canyons, the Kaibab plateaus, much faulting, and some volcanism. The timing of this event is uncertain. Perhaps it took place a century or two after the flood. Yeah, this is the hydroplate theory's perspective right here. That must be a copy from Walt's book. Okay. In most cases, streams, and then they're going to talk about barbed canyons. And that's interesting. That's what they can't explain. Okay. In most cases, side streams enter their main stream at acute angles. However, the drainage through the barbed canyons enter the Colorado River at obtuse angles. These canyons are called barbed because on a map, their backward orientation gives them the appearance of barbed wire. Except for an occasional cloudburst directly overhead, there is essentially no drainage through these giant canyons. So what cut them, and why are they backwards? The answer lies in the northward dip of the land shortly after the vast weight of sediment were suddenly removed to the south by the dumping of the Grand and Hopi Lakes. The drainage pattern was reversed for the surface drainage and the water spilling out of Echo and Vermilion Cliffs and elsewhere. Okay, so the hydroplate perspective, and it makes a lot of sense. Okay, since 1989, August Austin acknowledged in a phone call that he purchased a copy of my book while visiting friends in St. Paul, Minnesota. This occurred several weeks after it was published in late August 1989. The portion of the 1990 ICR guidebook, which dealt with the formation of Grand Lakes, suddenly became very definite and more detailed. An 11-page section in the larger 1989 guidebook entitled Erosion of the Grand Canyon, a Geologist's Personal Reflections, became a 25-page chapter entitled How Was the Grand Canyon Eroded in the smaller 1990 guidebook. Reflections became How It Happened, a 2-page subsection entitled The Catastrophic Drainage Theory. In the 1989 guidebook became 3 sections, totaling 11 pages. Those sections were the breach dam theory, evidence for the breach dam, and how the breach occurred. Most significantly, the 1990 edition had a map, page 76, very similar to the one I published above, even including for the first time in an ICR book the names Hopi Lake and Grand Lake, unreferenced. A lady who took the April 28th to May 6, 1990 ICR tour sent me her book several months later. I scanned it and saw the map of Grand Lake and Hopi Lake and guessed that Austin lifted my explanation. I was not shocked because I had seen in the 1988 and 1990 guidebooks many examples of artwork that Austin had lifted from other authors. Austin and I had read many of the same reports. I spent less than 5 minutes looking over the 1990 guidebook. It was not until June 16th, 1993, when I was writing Austin, that I read the relevant section. More plagiarism. Cutting out a copyrighted figure, pasting it in your book, and then copyrighting your book is a copyright infringement, plagiarism, and illegal. Okay, simply mentioning the originator's name, as Austin sometimes did, is not a copyright release. How ICR intended to distribute that copyrighted book is irrelevant. ICR copyrighted artwork that was not theirs. For many years, I have been aware of another likely case of plagiarism by ICR, which I brought to Dr. Morris's attention in June 18th, 1993. His complete response is as followed. With reference to the Slusher book, this is the very first time I have read any plagiarism in the book. The example you cited seemed superficially, at least, to be a fairly standard mathematical derivation. I doubt whether Professor Stacy would call it plagiarism. In any case, this is the first time anyone has mentioned it. As you know, Harold Schlester left ICR about 8 years ago, and we have had very little contact with him since. The only reason we still list a few of his monographs is because the original printings have not been exhausted. We have never planned to reprint any of them. In view of your complaint, we will possibly delete this particular book out of our next catalog, although much of the information in it is still worthwhile. Unquote. I was sorry that Morris did not see this as a likely case of plagiarism and that he viewed it as a complaint. I had hoped he would appreciate being told of possible problem and would consider removing the book from his inventory. Since Morris did not see this as plagiarism, the relevant pages are attached, attachment 3, for the readers to decide. In March of 1991, I wrote Morris a 6-page letter listing inaccurate writings by him in 1984 about which I had firsthand knowledge. Those widely distributed writings were harmful to my ministry. They were also a factor in my taking steps to close our organization in 1985. Those steps involved a move from Chicago to Phoenix. In that letter, I also suggested to Morris that we discuss other matters of accuracy in face-to-face meetings. He ignored my offer. Had he accepted, these subjects and more would have been brought privately to his attention in 1991. Conclusion. Newberry, 1861, and Blackwelder, 1934, were the first 2 people to propose that impounded lakes suddenly spilled out and eroded canyons along the Colorado River. In 1984, Austin wrote of similarities between the Grand Canyon and a 100-foot deep canyon at Mount St. Helens, which formed as a result of a breached dam. In December of 1986, Holroyd was probably the first person to show where a lake may have been, which might have spilled out through a fault and formed the Grand Canyon. Austin wrote in the 1988-1989 guidebooks that he was considering whether a lake east of the Grand Canyon could have breached the Kaibab Plateau to form the Grand Canyon. I began speaking nationally about the Grand Lake explanation on September 16, 1988. I published a brief summary of the GLE in August of 1989, which Austin obtained weeks later. It specified how and where the breaching occurred, how the lake was filled, and why so much water was released so quickly, and why the Kaibab Plateau formed after Grand, Hopi, and higher lakes dumped. Austin published in the 1990 guidebook a map similar to mine showing and naming without reference Grand Lake impounded behind Vermilion and Echo Cliffs. For several years, I've tried to ignore vague claims that I had plagiarized Austin's work. Clearly, ignoring the matter would only make it worse. Dr. and Mrs. Brock independently recall hearing such allegations from an angry Steve Austin. Surprisingly, Austin told me in writing and on the phone that he never felt that I had taken his ideas. On the other hand, Austin has continually taken the artwork of many Grand Canyon researchers, placed them in ICR guidebooks, and then copyrighted those guidebooks. He took credit for Holroyd's important ideas, which preceded mine by 2 years, and placed them in his backdated 1989 guidebook. Austin then says that my conclusion preceded yours by 2 years. Austin knew that Holroyd's drawing was based on a 5,777 feet. Why then did Austin say in his 1989 guidebook that the big lake, really 3 lakes, was at 5,700 foot elevation? I began using that unique but perhaps incorrect number in the September 1988. What overriding need caused Austin in February of 1989 to go to the trouble to add Holroyd's map to the 1988 field guidebook, but nothing else of technical substance? Finally, Austin's breach dam ideas became very detailed and specific in the 1990 guidebook, which he published about 5 or 6 months after he acknowledged buying my book. Also disturbing is Henry Morris minimizing another example of plagiarism and copyright infringement with ICR. What lies behind these actions? Does ICR believe that it must be the source of new ideas concerning creation and the flood? Is there a not invented here attitude, a problem of pride, or even arrogance? I cannot answer this, but Matthew 18:15-17 is clear. Go first to your brother privately. I did that on June 18th. Next, if he does not listen to you, take 1 or 2 more witnesses. This paper does that. It is a simple matter to admit a series of mistakes, apologize, correct the cause, whatever it is, and move on from there. The creation movement would greatly benefit. Attachment 1 and 3 are not included in reproduction of this report, but were sent to Austin and Morris. They are available upon request. Audio tape of radio interview with Walt Brown dated September 16th. Number 2, map conceived and produced by Edmund Holroyd, and 3 copies from books by Schlusser and Stacy. And here are the reference notes for your perusement. So this is what's happening. And this happened, 20 years ago, 30 years ago? And here's some more of the sources. Okay, you can read all that in your time. So this is the report that Dr. Walt Brown submitted. This, I think, might be Holroyd's map. And he's got the dam behind the Kaibab upwarp. And I think it's behind the Echo and Vermilion cliffs. That makes more sense. Okie doke. So yeah, there we have it. Physics, more copyright stuff. I'll just, if you want to go through that. But that's the end of it. Okay, so this is what he was talking about. And again, if you want that, you can go into rsr.org and search the executive summary and go through. And what did we click? Yeah, that was from June 26th to June 22nd. Notes and mediation. Oh, wait a minute. That wasn't it. Brown to Austin. Okay, set the record straight. So that's what we did there. Let me go back to live stream and get rid of this. Remove that. Okay. Hopefully things are working, and it worked all that time. Thank you for going through all of this. How long has it been? It's been an hour and 20 minutes. So thank you for your curiosity on what's been happening and what's holding science back. Because the hydroplate theory, again, is making accurate predictions. NASA discoveries are validating it. It logically explains 25 major features on Earth and in the solar system. And if we would have been banging this drum for 50 years, we'd have a lot of scientific clout in the secular community. But because I think it's this situation has held it back, so we need to address this situation. So again, thank you for your making it here through the whole end. And may God bless you and have a blessed day.